Most people think they control their mind, but the truth is their mind controls them. And until you fix this, nothing in your life truly changes. This audiobook is not about motivation, it's about control. Real mental control that changes how you think, react, and live. Before you can control your mind, you need to understand how it actually works. Let's start. Chapter 1. Understanding your mind. Have you ever paused for a moment and wondered why your mind feels like it's running in circles? 1 minute you're calm, the next you're reacting to something you barely even noticed, an offhand comment, a traffic jam, an unexpected deadline. That jumble of thoughts, impulses, and emotions that often feels uncontrollable is your mind doing exactly what it has been trained to do: respond automatically. And here's the key insight. Most of the time, we are not conscious participants in that process. We think we are steering the ship, but often our mind is steering us. The first step toward controlling your mind is understanding what it is, how it works, and why it behaves the way it does. The mind isn't just a single entity, it's a complex interplay between your conscious awareness, the part of your mind that notices and decides, and your subconscious, which quietly drives habits, reactions, and patterns without your active consent. It's the subconscious that often causes overthinking, anxiety, or emotional reactions before you even realize what's happening. Imagine a co-pilot who's been trained to react to every minor bump in the sky without asking you first. That's your subconscious in action. One of the most common pitfalls people face is assuming their thoughts are facts. You hear a comment from a colleague, and instantly your mind interprets it as criticism, a judgment, or even a personal attack. Your heart races, your thoughts spiral, and you find yourself reacting in ways that later make you regret or feel exhausted. This is not a failure, it's biology and habit. The human brain is designed to prioritize survival, which often manifests as emotional reactions first, logical responses later. Understanding this pattern is crucial because once you see it for what it is, you can start to intervene. Now, let's talk about mental patterns. Everyone has them. Maybe you get anxious before meetings, frustrated in traffic, or worried about things that haven't even happened yet. These patterns are like grooves in a record. Your mind keeps playing the same tune unless you consciously scratch the record and create a new one. Recognizing these patterns is the foundation of control. The goal is not to eliminate thoughts or emotions, because that's impossible, but to observe them, understand their triggers, and choose how to respond. Consider a simple scenario. You're at work, and your manager gives you feedback that isn't exactly glowing. Your mind races. I'm not good enough. I'll never succeed. They probably don't like me. If you let this initial wave dictate your behavior, you might snap defensively, withdraw, or overcompensate in stress. But what if you paused? What if you observed? Here's that pattern of self-doubt showing up again. I notice it, and I can choose how to act. That pause, as brief as a few seconds, is where mental control begins. The ability to notice a reaction before it becomes a response is a skill you can develop. Another point to understand is the illusion of multitasking. Our mind likes to think it's capable of juggling 10 things at once, but in reality, it switches rapidly between tasks, creating the illusion of productivity while subtly wearing down focus and clarity. Over time, this mental fragmentation reduces your ability to stay calm, think clearly, and respond intentionally. Recognizing this helps you appreciate why mental discipline isn't about doing more, it's about doing less with full attention. So, how do we start taking control? Awareness is the first step, but awareness alone isn't enough if it's passive. You need to actively monitor your thoughts, reactions, and emotional responses. Begin by noticing small things, how you respond to minor annoyances, how your thoughts drift in meetings, or how you react to stress in traffic. These small moments, repeated daily, reveal patterns that you didn't know existed. Once you see these patterns clearly, you can start experimenting with small interventions. Maybe you take a deep breath before responding, or you pause to ask whether your thoughts are facts or assumptions. These small shifts accumulate, creating a strong foundation for mental control. Let's also consider the role of beliefs and conditioning. Many of the automatic reactions you experience aren't random. They're learned from years of experiences, culture, and reinforcement. From childhood, we pick up messages about what's acceptable, dangerous, or important, and our subconscious internalizes them. These beliefs shape your reactions without you realizing it. Recognizing that your mind is conditioned helps you approach control with curiosity rather than judgment. You're not flawed, you're trained, and just like any training, it can be reshaped. Another key idea is the difference between thinking and reacting. Thinking is conscious, deliberate, and intentional. Reacting is fast, automatic, and often emotional. Most of us spend the majority of our mental energy reacting without realizing it. One way to shift this is by asking yourself, am I thinking or am I reacting? This question alone creates a micro pause that can stop a negative spiral in its tracks. Over time, these micro pauses become habits, and you begin to notice a profound change. Less stress, clearer decision-making, and more calm in daily life. It's also worth noting that control doesn't mean suppression. Trying to suppress emotions often backfires, creating tension and stress. Mental control is about choice and direction, not denial. You don't have to stop feeling anger, anxiety, or fear. You need to decide how these emotions influence your actions. You can let them pass, acknowledge them, and act intentionally instead of reflexively. That's a subtle but powerful shift that changes everything, from relationships to productivity to self-esteem. Lastly, let's talk about observation without judgment. One of the most effective techniques for understanding your mind is to become a curious observer. Watch your thoughts as if they belong to someone else. Notice the patterns, notice the triggers, and notice the reactions. Don't label them as good or bad, simply observe. This creates distance between you and your mental processes, which is where true control emerges. By the end of this chapter, the goal is simple but profound. You start seeing your mind not as a wild animal to be tamed, but as a complex system you can understand and direct. You begin to notice your patterns, your triggers, and your reactions. And most importantly, you realize that mental control is not about perfection. It's about conscious choice. Chapter 2. The Power of Awareness. Most people don't realize how much of their day is spent on autopilot. You wake up, reach for your phone, scroll without thinking, react to messages, move through conversations, handle tasks, and somewhere in the middle of all that, your mind is constantly talking, commenting, judging, predicting, worrying, but rarely noticing itself. That's where awareness comes in. Not as some abstract idea, but as a very practical skill. In simple terms, awareness means being present enough to notice what's happening inside your mind while it's happening. It sounds obvious, but if you pay close attention, you'll see how rare that actually is. Think about the last time you got irritated. Maybe someone said something slightly off, or something didn't go your way. The reaction probably came quickly, almost instantly. You felt it before you could even explain it. That's the autopilot at work. Now imagine if, in that exact moment, you could catch it. Not stop it immediately, just notice it. I'm getting irritated right now. That tiny shift, just noticing, changes everything. Awareness doesn't mean controlling your thoughts right away. It means seeing them clearly first. There's a common misunderstanding that controlling the mind starts with discipline or willpower. But in reality, control begins with observation. You can't manage what you don't even see, and most thoughts pass through unnoticed, quietly shaping your mood, your decisions, even your identity. Here's something worth considering. Not every thought you have is useful. In fact, many of them are repetitive, exaggerated, or simply wrong. The mind tends to fill gaps with assumptions. Someone doesn't reply to your message, and suddenly your mind creates a whole story. Maybe they're ignoring you. Maybe they're upset. Maybe you did something wrong. None of that may be true, but it feels real because you didn't pause to question it. Awareness creates that pause. At first, it might feel strange. You're not used to stepping back from your own thoughts. But once you start, you'll notice patterns. The same kinds of thoughts appearing in similar situations. The same emotional reactions repeating themselves. It's almost like watching a loop. For example, you might notice that every time you face uncertainty, your mind jumps to worst-case scenarios. Or when someone criticizes you, even slightly, your thoughts become defensive or self-doubting. These patterns don't come out of nowhere. They've been built over time, and until you see them clearly, they'll keep running. Now, here's the interesting part. Awareness alone begins to weaken those patterns. Not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly. When you observe a thought, instead of getting pulled into it, it loses some of its power. It's like shining a light in a dark room. The shapes that once felt overwhelming suddenly become clearer, less intimidating. Let's take a simple everyday situation. You're stuck in traffic. Normally, your reaction might be frustration, maybe even anger. Your mind starts complaining about the delay, the situation, the lack of control. But this time, you try something different. You notice the reaction as it begins. Okay, I'm getting frustrated. You feel it, but instead of feeding it with more thoughts, you just observe it. Something shifts. The frustration doesn't disappear instantly, but it doesn't grow either. You've interrupted the cycle. That's awareness in action. It's not about forcing calmness. It's about not adding fuel to the fire. One of the simplest ways to build awareness is through attention to your breath, not in a complicated ritualistic way, just noticing it. When your mind starts racing, bring your focus to your breathing for a few moments. Feel the air moving in and out. That small act anchors you in the present. It gives you a reference point, something steady when your thoughts feel scattered. You can also practice awareness in conversation. The next time you're talking to someone, notice not just what they're saying, but how your mind reacts. Are you listening, or are you preparing your response? Are you fully present or distracted? These small observations reveal a lot about how your mind operates. Another powerful method is reflection. At the end of the day, take a few minutes to think back, not to judge yourself, but to understand. Where did you react automatically? What triggered you? What thoughts kept repeating? This isn't about finding faults, it's about building clarity. Over time, you'll start to see something important. There's a difference between you and your thoughts. At first, that idea might sound a bit abstract, but think about it. If you can observe a thought, it means you are not the thought itself. You are the one noticing it. That distinction is subtle, but it's powerful. Because once you see that, you realize you don't have to follow every thought that appears. You get to choose. Of course, this doesn't happen overnight. There will be moments when you forget, when you get caught up in reactions again. That's normal. The goal isn't perfection, it's progress. Each time you notice, even if it's after the reaction, you're strengthening awareness. And gradually, the gap between thought and reaction begins to widen. In that gap, you find space. Space to think clearly, space to respond instead of react, space to stay calm when things don't go your way. Awareness also changes how you deal with negative emotions. Instead of trying to push them away or fix them immediately, you learn to sit with them, not in a passive way, but in a steady, grounded way. You acknowledge what you're feeling without letting it take over. There's a kind of quiet strength in that. You're no longer at the mercy of every passing emotion. You're not suppressing anything, but you're not being controlled by it either. You're simply aware. And that awareness becomes a foundation. Everything else, emotional control, mental discipline, clarity, it all builds on this. Without awareness, those things feel forced. With awareness, they start to feel natural. By now, you might be wondering how this fits into your daily life. The answer is simple. It doesn't require extra time, just a shift in attention. You practice it in small moments, while walking, while working, while interacting with others. It becomes part of how you experience life, not something separate from it. And the more you practice, the more noticeable the changes become. You react less impulsively. You think more clearly. You feel less overwhelmed by situations that used to trigger you. Not because life got easier, but because your relationship with your mind changed. You're no longer just inside your thoughts. You're aware of them. That's the beginning of real control.
Chapter 3: Mastering Emotional Responses. There's a moment, small, almost invisible, that decides how your day unfolds. It happens right after something triggers you. Someone says something you don't like. A plan falls apart. You feel ignored, disrespected, or misunderstood. In that split second, before you speak, before you react, before your emotions fully take over, there's a gap. Most people never notice it. They move straight from feeling to reaction, as if the two are the same thing, but they're not. That gap is where your power lives. Mastering your mind isn't about never feeling anger, frustration, or anxiety. That's unrealistic. Emotions are natural. They're part of being human. The real skill, the one that changes everything, is learning how to respond to those emotions without being controlled by them. Let's be honest, emotional reactions feel immediate. They don't ask for permission. You don't sit there and decide to feel irritated. It just happens. Your body reacts first, your thoughts follow, and before you know it, you're already inside the reaction. But here's something worth understanding. The emotion is automatic. The reaction is not. You might not control the first spark, but you absolutely influence what happens next. Take a familiar situation. You're having a conversation and someone interrupts you. Maybe they dismiss your idea or correct you in a way that feels unnecessary. Instantly, something rises inside you. Heat, tension, a quick thought, that was disrespectful, and right after that, the urge to respond. This is where most people react. They speak quickly, defend themselves, or shut down completely. Later, they replay the moment, wishing they had handled it differently. Now imagine something slightly different. The same situation happens, the same feeling appears, but this time you notice it, just for a second. I'm getting irritated. That's it. No judgment, no suppression, just awareness. And in that brief moment, something shifts. You're no longer inside the reaction, you're observing it. That gives you space, and in that space, you have a choice. You can still respond, but now it's intentional, not automatic. This is the foundation of emotional control. A lot of people think controlling emotions means pushing them down or pretending they don't exist, but that approach usually backfires. Suppressed emotions don't disappear, they build pressure. Eventually, they come out in ways that feel even more intense. Real control is quieter than that. It's not about force, it's about direction. You feel the emotion, but you don't let it decide your behavior. To understand this better, it helps to look at triggers. Everyone has them, certain situations, words, or people that create a stronger emotional reaction than usual. Maybe it's criticism, maybe it's being ignored, maybe it's feeling out of control. Triggers aren't random, they're connected to past experiences, expectations, and beliefs. When something touches one of those sensitive points, your mind reacts quickly, almost protectively. The problem is, the reaction is often exaggerated. A simple comment feels like a personal attack. A delay feels like failure. A disagreement feels like rejection. When you don't recognize your triggers, they control you. But once you start noticing them, they become predictable. And once they're predictable, they're manageable. Here's a simple way to work with this. The next time you feel a strong emotional reaction, don't rush to fix it. Instead, ask yourself, what exactly triggered this? Not just the situation, but the meaning you attached to it. That question slows things down. It moves you from reaction to reflection. Another useful technique is the pause. It sounds simple, almost too simple, but it's one of the most effective tools you have. When you feel a surge of emotion, pause before responding, even if it's just for a few seconds. Take a breath. Let the first wave pass.
What you'll notice is that emotions come in waves. The initial intensity rises quickly, but if you don't feed it with more thoughts, it begins to settle. Most reactions happen during that first wave. If you can ride it out, even briefly, you gain clarity. You see the situation more accurately, and your response becomes calmer, more measured. This doesn't mean you become passive. You can still speak up. You can still set boundaries, but you do it from a place of control, not impulse. There's also something important about how you interpret situations. Two people can experience the same event and react completely differently. Why? Because of the story they tell themselves about it. If someone cancels a plan, one person might think they don't respect me. Another might think something must have come up. The event is the same, but the emotional response changes based on interpretation. That's a powerful realization. It means your emotions are not just driven by events, they're shaped by your thoughts about those events. So part of mastering emotional responses is learning to question those interpretations. Not everything needs to be taken personally. Not every situation is as serious as it first appears. Sometimes your mind is simply overreacting, and when you recognize that, you create space for a different response. There's also value in learning to stay with discomfort. Most emotional reactions are attempts to escape discomfort quickly. You feel uneasy, so you react to get rid of that feeling. But reacting doesn't always solve the problem. It often creates a new one. What if instead you allowed yourself to sit with the discomfort for a moment? Not forever, just long enough to understand it. It might feel unfamiliar at first, but over time you build tolerance. You realize that you don't need to react immediately to feel okay. The emotion can exist without controlling you. That's a different kind of strength. And then there's communication. Emotional control doesn't mean silence. It means choosing how you express what you feel. Instead of reacting with blame or defensiveness, you can respond with clarity. "I didn't like how that came across," is very different from snapping back. It keeps the conversation open instead of escalating it. People respond differently when they sense control instead of chaos, and that affects your relationships in ways that are hard to overstate. As you practice this, you'll start noticing small changes, moments where you would have reacted before, but now you pause. Situations that used to frustrate you, but now feel manageable. Conversations that go smoother because you stayed grounded. These aren't dramatic shifts, they're subtle, but they add up. Over time, you build a reputation, not just with others, but with yourself. You begin to trust your ability to handle situations without losing control, and that trust is powerful. Because once you trust your responses, you stop fearing your emotions. You know they might show up, but you also know they don't own you. By now, it should be clear, mastering emotional responses isn't about becoming emotionless, it's about becoming intentional. You feel fully, but you act wisely. You experience emotions, but you don't become them. And in that balance, you find a kind of calm that isn't fragile. It doesn't depend on everything going your way. It comes from knowing that no matter what happens, you can handle your response. That's control.
Chapter 4. Restructuring Thought Patterns. By now, you've started to notice something important. Your mind doesn't just react, it repeats.
The same kinds of thoughts show up in familiar situations. A small mistake turns into self-doubt. A delay becomes frustration. A bit of uncertainty grows into anxiety. It's rarely the situation itself that overwhelms you. It's the pattern your mind falls into. And once a pattern is repeated enough times, it starts to feel true. That's where things get tricky, because over time, repeated thoughts don't just pass through your mind, they shape how you see yourself, how you interpret the world, and how you respond to challenges. A single thought might not mean much, but a pattern, that can quietly define your behavior. The good news is this: patterns can be changed. Not instantly and not by force, but gradually through awareness and intentional shifts. Let's start with something simple. Think about a thought you've had recently that didn't feel helpful. Maybe something like, "I'm not good at this," or "this never works out for me." It might have come and gone quickly, but if you look closely, you'll probably notice it's not new, it's familiar. That's how patterns work. They echo. Now here's the key question. Is that thought actually true, or is it just well practiced? Most of the time, it's the second one. Your mind tends to take shortcuts. It generalizes from past experiences and fills in gaps with assumptions. If something didn't go well once, your mind might label it as a pattern, even if it isn't. And once that label is in place, it starts influencing future situations. This is how limiting beliefs form. They don't appear all at once. They build slowly, thought by thought, until they feel like facts. And because they feel true, you stop questioning them. But you can question them. And that's where restructuring begins. Instead of accepting every thought at face value, you start examining it. Not aggressively, not with frustration, but with curiosity. When a negative thought appears, pause and ask yourself, is this completely accurate? Not partially true, not emotionally convincing, but actually accurate. You might find that many thoughts are exaggerated. They take a small issue and stretch it into something bigger, or they ignore context completely. For example, making one mistake doesn't mean you're incapable. Feeling uncertain doesn't mean you're unprepared. A difficult moment doesn't define your entire ability. But your mind doesn't always see it that way. It prefers quick conclusions. So your job isn't to fight those thoughts, it's to challenge them gently. Replace "I always mess this up" with something more balanced, like "this didn't go the way I wanted, but I can improve." It's not overly positive and it's not unrealistic. It's simply more accurate. That shift might seem small, but it changes how your mind processes the situation. Over time, these small corrections begin to reshape your internal dialogue. Another important part of restructuring is recognizing cognitive distortions, those subtle ways your mind twists reality without you noticing. You might assume what others are thinking without evidence. You might focus only on what went wrong, ignoring what went right. You might expect the worst outcome before anything has even happened. These patterns feel convincing, but they're not reliable. Once you become aware of them, you start catching them in real time. You notice when your mind jumps to conclusions or overgeneralizes, and in that moment you can step back and adjust your perspective. You don't have to believe every thought that shows up. There's also value in shifting perspective. Sometimes the easiest way to break a thought pattern is to look at the situation from a different angle. Ask yourself, how would I see this if it happened to someone else? Or what would a calm, objective version of me think right now? This creates distance. It moves you out of the emotional intensity and into a clearer space. You begin to see that your first interpretation isn't the only one. Another powerful tool is visualization, not in a vague, wishful way, but as a way to train your mind to expect different outcomes. If your mind is used to imagining failure, hesitation, or rejection, it will naturally react with anxiety in similar situations. But if you begin to visualize yourself handling situations calmly, responding clearly, and staying composed, you begin to build a new mental reference. Your mind becomes familiar with a new pattern, and familiarity reduces resistance. Now let's talk about consistency. Changing thought patterns isn't about one big breakthrough. It's about repeated small adjustments. Each time you question a negative thought, each time you choose a more balanced perspective, you're reinforcing a new pathway. At first, the old patterns will still feel stronger. That's normal. They've been practiced longer. But with time, the new patterns begin to take hold. It's a gradual shift. You don't wake up one day with a completely different mind. You notice that certain thoughts don't affect you the same way. You recover faster. You don't spiral as easily. That's progress. It's also important to be patient with yourself during this process. There will be moments when old patterns show up strongly. You might catch yourself thinking in the same way you've always done. That doesn't mean nothing has changed. It just means the pattern is still there, and now you're aware of it. And awareness gives you the chance to respond differently. That's what matters. Another subtle shift happens as you continue this work. Your identity begins to change. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who overthinks, doubts, or reacts easily, you start to see yourself as someone who notices, reflects, and chooses. It's a quieter identity, but a stronger one. You're no longer defined by your automatic thoughts. You're defined by how you handle them. And that changes how you approach challenges. You don't avoid situations because of what your mind might say. You enter them knowing you can manage your thoughts as they arise. That confidence isn't loud. It's steady. It comes from experience. As you move forward, remember this. Restructuring your thoughts isn't about becoming overly positive or ignoring reality. It's about seeing things clearly, not worse than they are, not better than they are, just as they are. Clarity creates calm, and calm creates control. By now, you've built a strong foundation. You understand your mind. You're aware of your patterns. You're learning to respond instead of react. And now, you're shaping the way you think. In the next chapter, we'll take this even further, turning these mental shifts into consistent habits, building discipline, and strengthening your ability to stay focused and in control, even when it's difficult. Because understanding is one thing, but applying it consistently, that's where real change happens.
There's a point where understanding your mind isn't enough anymore.
You can be aware of your thoughts. You can even manage your emotions in the moment. But if you don't build consistency, if you don't train your mind to hold that control over time, everything slips back into old patterns. Not all at once, just slowly, quietly. That's where discipline comes in. Not the loud, aggressive kind people often talk about, not forcing yourself into rigid routines or trying to become someone you're not. Real discipline is quieter. It's the ability to do what matters even when your mind resists it. And your mind will resist. That's normal. Left on its own, it prefers comfort, easy distractions, familiar habits. It avoids effort unless there's immediate reward. So when you try to focus or stay consistent or stick to something difficult, it pushes back. You feel it as restlessness, as boredom, as the urge to check your phone, to take a break, to delay things just a little longer. That resistance isn't a sign you're weak, it's a sign you're stepping outside what your mind is used to. The mistake most people make is waiting to feel ready before they act. They think discipline comes after motivation. But if you've paid attention to your own patterns, you already know that doesn't really work. Motivation comes and goes. It depends on mood, energy, even the time of day. Discipline works differently. It shows up regardless of how you feel. And it starts small. There's no need to overhaul your entire routine overnight. In fact, that usually backfires. You start with something manageable, something your mind can't easily reject. A short period of focused work, a few minutes of reflection, a simple commitment you can actually keep. What matters isn't intensity, it's consistency. Think of it like training a muscle. You don't build strength by pushing yourself once and stopping. You build it by repeating small efforts over time. The same applies to your mind. Each time you choose to focus instead of getting distracted, you strengthen control. Each time you follow through on something you said you would do, even when it's inconvenient, you reinforce discipline. These moments don't feel dramatic. They're easy to overlook, but they add up. Now, one of the biggest challenges here is distraction. It's everywhere, not just in your environment, but inside your mind. You sit down to work and suddenly you remember something else you need to do, or your thoughts drift, or you feel the urge to check something just for a second. That's not random. Your mind is trying to avoid sustained effort. So instead of fighting distraction directly, it helps to reduce the opportunities for it. Create an environment where focus becomes easier. Put your phone away, clear your workspace, limit unnecessary inputs. You're not removing distractions completely. That's unrealistic. You're just making it easier to stay present. Then there's attention. We often underestimate how fragmented our attention has become. Constant switching, constant stimulation, it trains the mind to expect novelty. So when you try to focus on one thing for an extended period, it feels uncomfortable. That discomfort is part of the process. Instead of avoiding it, sit with it. Let your mind settle. You'll notice that after a few minutes, the resistance fades a bit. Your focus deepens. What felt difficult starts to feel manageable. That's the shift you're looking for. Another part of discipline is keeping promises to yourself. It sounds simple, but it's powerful. Every time you decide to do something and follow through, you build trust with yourself, and that trust makes future discipline easier. On the other hand, when you constantly delay, avoid, or abandon your own commitments, your mind learns that your decisions don't carry weight. Over time, that weakens control. So start treating your own decisions with a bit more seriousness, not in a rigid way, but with intention. If you say you'll do something, do it, even if it's small, especially if it's small, because those small actions shape your identity. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone who struggles with consistency, but as someone who follows through. That shift doesn't happen through big achievements. It happens through repeated, quiet actions. There's also something to be said about routine, not a strict schedule that controls every minute of your day, but a loose structure that supports your focus. When certain actions become part of your routine, they require less mental effort. You don't have to decide each time, you just do them. That reduces resistance. For example, if you set a consistent time to work, reflect, or practice awareness, it becomes familiar, and familiarity makes discipline easier. You're not constantly negotiating with your mind. Still, there will be days when things don't go as planned. You lose focus, you skip something, you fall back into old habits. That's part of it. The goal isn't to avoid those moments completely, it's to recover quickly. Instead of turning one missed step into a pattern, you reset, you return to the process without overthinking it. No frustration, no self-criticism, just continue. Because discipline isn't built on perfection, it's built on persistence. And then there's patience. This might be the part people struggle with the most. You want to see results, you want to feel in control quickly, but mental discipline develops gradually. It doesn't announce itself, it shows up in subtle ways. You notice you're less distracted, you finish tasks more easily, you stay calm under pressure, you don't react as quickly. These are quiet changes, but they're real. Over time, they become part of who you are. At this stage, your relationship with your mind starts to shift again. It's no longer something you're trying to control forcefully. It becomes something you're training, guiding, shaping. There's less tension, more clarity, more stability. And that stability carries into everything else, your work, your decisions, your interactions. Because when your mind is steady, everything else becomes easier to handle. So as you move forward, keep this in mind. Discipline isn't about doing more, it's about doing what matters consistently. Not perfectly, just consistently. And in that consistency, control becomes natural.
Chapter 6. Applying Mental Control in Daily Life. At this point, you've done something most people never really commit to. You've started understanding your mind, noticing your patterns, questioning your thoughts, and building discipline around them. That alone puts you in a different place. But here's where it actually matters. Not in theory, not in quiet moments of reflection. In real life, when things are messy, unpredictable, and don't go the way you planned. Because that's the real test of control. It's easy to feel calm when everything is going smoothly, when no one is challenging you, when nothing feels urgent, when your environment is quiet. But control isn't built in those moments. It's revealed when something disrupts your balance. A difficult conversation, a sudden problem, a moment where your emotions start rising again. That's where everything you've learned either shows up or disappears. So the question becomes, how do you actually apply this? Let's start with something simple. Next time you feel pressure, real pressure, not just mild discomfort, pause for a second and notice what's happening inside. Not outside, inside. What's your mind saying? What emotion is building? What reaction is about to come out? That awareness, even if it lasts just a moment, changes your position. You're no longer fully inside the reaction. You're slightly outside it, observing. And from there, you make a choice. Not a perfect choice, just a better one. Maybe you don't respond immediately. Maybe you take a breath. Maybe you say less than you normally would. These are small shifts, but they prevent situations from escalating. Over time, you'll notice something interesting. Situations that used to feel overwhelming don't feel the same anymore. Not because they've changed, but because you have. Take stress, for example. Most people experience stress as something external. Work pressure, deadlines, expectations. But if you look closely, stress isn't just about what's happening. It's about how your mind is processing it. Two people can face the same situation. One feels overwhelmed, the other stays relatively steady. The difference isn't the situation, it's their mental response. So when stress shows up, instead of trying to remove it immediately, shift your focus inward. Ask yourself, what part of this is actually within my control right now? That question does something subtle. It redirects your attention from chaos to clarity. You stop trying to handle everything at once and focus on what's directly in front of you. And that alone reduces the pressure. Now let's talk about social situations. This is where a lot of people lose control without realizing it. Someone's tone feels off. A comment seems unnecessary. You start interpreting things, building assumptions, reacting internally. Before you know it, you're no longer present, you're inside your own thoughts. Applying control here doesn't mean becoming distant or silent. It means staying grounded while interacting. Listen more carefully, not just to respond, but to understand. Notice when your mind starts jumping to conclusions. Pull it back gently. Sometimes you don't need to react at all. And sometimes responding calmly says more than reacting ever could. There's a certain strength in that. People can sense it, not always consciously, but they feel the difference. Conversations become smoother. Conflicts don't escalate as easily. You carry yourself differently, not because you're trying to control others, but because you're steady within yourself. Then there are moments of uncertainty, decisions you're not sure about, situations where the outcome isn't clear. This is where the mind tends to overwork, thinking, rethinking, imagining different scenarios, trying to predict everything. It feels productive, but often it just creates noise. In these moments, control means simplifying. Instead of trying to solve everything at once, focus on the next step, just the next one. What can you do now with the information you have? That approach keeps you moving without getting stuck in overthinking. It also builds confidence, not the kind that comes from knowing everything, but the kind that comes from knowing you can handle whatever comes next. And then there's something quieter, but just as important, the way you talk to yourself. Throughout the day, there's a constant inner dialogue. Sometimes it's encouraging, sometimes it's critical, sometimes it's just repetitive.
Most of it goes unnoticed, but it shapes how you feel, how you act, how you see yourself. Applying mental control means becoming aware of that voice and adjusting it when needed. Not forcing positivity, not pretending everything is fine, but keeping it balanced, realistic, supportive. Instead of, "I can't handle this," maybe it becomes, "This is difficult, but I'll figure it out." That shift doesn't remove the challenge, but it changes how you face it. Over time, these small adjustments become natural. You don't have to think about them as much. You just respond differently. You pause more often. You react less intensely. You recover faster when things go wrong. And gradually, control becomes part of your baseline. Not something you switch on and off, but something that's just there. Of course, there will still be moments when you slip, times when you react too quickly, overthink, or lose focus. That doesn't mean you failed. It just means you're still human. What matters is how quickly you come back. You notice it, you reset, you continue. No need to dwell on it, because this isn't about reaching a perfect state. It's about building a reliable one. A state where even when things are uncertain, you don't feel completely thrown off. You stay grounded. And from that place, you handle life more effectively. Not by controlling everything around you, but by controlling how you respond to it. That's the shift. And once you experience it, even in small moments, it changes how you approach everything else. You stop chasing control in external situations. You start building it internally. And that's something no situation can take away. You began this journey trying to control your mind. Now it's a little different. You're not forcing control. You're practicing awareness, making intentional choices, and building consistency. And through that, control emerges naturally. Not perfect, not constant, but real.